Good morning. This is John from the Springs Mennonite Church, and I'm here today to continue with our story of David. When I left last time, Nathan had confronted David for what he had done. And it's amazing how people respond sometimes when they're confronted. Do they admit it? Do they admit it and it changed their behavior? Or do they pretend they didn't hear it or somehow they didn't do it? David tried real hard to cover up his sin with Bathsheba. It didn't work. And then Nathan the prophet comes and confronts him about what he did in a story way about a guy with some sheep, and that got to him. It says, in fact, it infuriated him. But did it make a difference? Did it really change anything? Well, let's read verse 13, verses 13 to 19 first. Then David confessed to Nathan, I have sinned against God. Nathan replied, yes, but the Lord have forgiven you, and you won't die because of this sin. Nevertheless, because you have shown utter contempt for the word of God, by doing this, your child will die. Let's stop a second. I've never had one of my children to die before me. I haven't had any to die after me yet. I guess I'm not old enough for that. But age is not it's not a respecter of persons. And so David admits, yes, I have sinned. Please forgive me, Lord. Now you'd think that'd be the end of the story, but it really isn't. So let's go ahead and read some more. After Nathan returned to his home, the Lord sent a deadly illness to the child of David and Uriah's wife. David begged God to spare the child. He went without food and lay on the ground, the bare ground. The elders at the church of the night pleaded with him to get up and eat something, but he refused. Then on the seventh day, the child had died. David's activities, well, they didn't know what to say to him. His advisors just didn't know how to approach him. It says that he, David, wouldn't listen while the child was alive. They said, what drastic thing will he do now when the baby's died? See, they're trying to protect him from himself. That's all they're trying to do. They're not trying to meddle in his business. They're not trying to put him on a shelf somewhere. They're trying to guide him. And then we'll read here in verse 19. When David saw them whispering, he realized what had happened. Is the child dead? He asked. Yes, they replied. He is dead. Okay, let's stop there. David is confronted in this powerful way of a story, and he admits his guilt. That's a good step. But how repentant really was he? Well, we're left to sort of guess on that. I'm going to read a couple more scriptures in a minute, and that'll help us guess a little better. But he goes in the morning, and he says, he begs and pleads God for the child's life, and he doesn't get it. Now what happens? If you were David, what would you do at this point? What would you think God might do? And how would you respond to it? David doesn't have the advice of others. Well, he kind of did, but you won't give it. I can understand that. So then it goes on to say this. Let's look at verse 20. Then David got up from the ground washed himself, put on lotions, and changed his clothes. He went to the tabernacle and worshiped the Lord. After that, he returned to the palace and was served food and ate. His advisors were amazed. We don't understand, they told him. While the child was still living, you wept and refused to eat. But now the child is dead, you've stopped your mourning and are eating again. David replied, I fasted and I wept while the child was alive, for I said, perhaps the Lord will be gracious to me and let the child live. But why should I fast when he's dead? Can I bring him back again? Well, I do to him one day all these things and he's still not returned. Then verse 24 says, David comforted Bathsheba, his wife, and he slept with her. And she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. We see this man David going all over the place in his response. He literally steals Uriah's wife, gets her pregnant, takes it into his family when he connives to kill Uriah. Nathan comes and says, you're the guy that did this. And he says that he's furious and he's so apologetic. And he mourns and wails and all the things the Jews did in those days during the death. And then as soon as the kid dies, he's up and back to normal. And his advisors don't know what to do. In fact, he comforts Bathsheba and gets her pregnant again. What do we find in these stories about David? What is it really that's happening here? Is he really repentant for what has happened? Well, I kind of think so. But at the same time, he's kind of anxious to just get on with whatever. And as we read some more of his story, we won't read all of it. He has a lot of problems in his life after this. But yet, he doesn't really seem to want to honestly admit what he's done and take responsibility for it. At least that's how I read this. I think he's being rather sarcastic towards his apology and shame. Maybe he's being a realist and says, well, there's nothing I can do now, so I'm going to go on living. Some people do that. And maybe that's just the way they cope. But it seems to me like the sorrow that David purports to have isn't all that deep. Now, you and I do things that offend God. And we apologize for them. Some of us do, most of the time. But are we really sorry we did it? Or are we perhaps sorry we got caught, as David got caught? God's blessing continues to flow, not so much on David, but on his offspring, this kid he creates with Bathsheba after the death of the first one. But that's another story. When you've offended God, do you really apologize? Or do you just do as much as you can to try to get by? Let's see what happens in David's life in the next few days and see which is the better option. Thanks for listening. If you have a need or a concern, let us know. We'll do whatever we can as fast as we can to help meet your need. Take care of yourself. Be safe. And I'll be back tomorrow with another thought.